It's fine, perfectly fine.
Here goes. We discussed the concepts of uh, sensibility
Hmm.
and understanding and a determinative judgment,
Okay.
right? So what is a determinative judgment? It is the conclusion drawn from a priori statement and a posteriori statement. Now, what example we took was man is mortal. That is an a priori statement that is to be assumed. Then we took the example of Socrates, as in Socrates is a man. That is an a posteriori statement that needs to be checked, that needs to be verified. And from those two statements, what we drew the conclusion as Socrates is mortal, which is drawn from these two statements, and that is why this is a determinative judgment. So, and this is true for this is true everywhere universally. So if Socrates is a man and if all men are mortal, then Socrates is mortal. He is going to die. And this goes for A, B, C, D, any sort of person, right? So this is a determinative judgment. But Kant says that such statements cannot be given um, for ethical issues or for aesthetic issues. These
Right.
these two are exceptions, sort of. um, so ethical judgments cannot be determinative because there is no absolute requirement for these judgments, and it really depends from person to person. And aesthetics judgments also cannot be determinative for similar reasons, because you know we're going to come to that later. So yeah, and so you cannot. We took the example of this idea of a landscape uh, that was discussed, that all landscapes are beautiful. Let that be statement one. This is a landscape. That's the second statement. And so from statement one and two, you cannot say that this is a beautiful landscape. That is not a determinative statement. That needs to be checked, right? And so such statements are called reflexive statement. Then now, to establish a statement as a determinative statement, as a universal law or rule, we need to define the categorical imperative. I think that was the term. Just a second. Uh, yeah, categorical imperative. And what is a categorical imperative is that if a certain rule or certain statement applies to everybody without any exceptions, that and by that we mean literally no exceptions. By that we mean that we have by that procedure we have established the categorical imperative. And if a certain statement follows this categorical imperative, then that statement can be a determinative statement. And ethical reasoning is also a part of ethical and aesthetic reasoning is also a part of this categorical imperative procedure, right? Then we discussed some conditions following which statement can become you know a determinative statement. A reflexive statement can become a determinative statement. There were four conditions. The first one was that the statement should be disinterested, as in there should be no bias in the statement or no personal likeness, or you know just because I like something, I like chocolate ice cream, does not mean that does not count, and that does not mean that it is really a good flavor, right? So no personal bias. That was the first rule. Second is that was that it should be arising. There should be a universal arising from common sense, right? And by this, what I gather is that it should need no special skills really to make the statement, as in it should not be something that is very, it should be a real commonsensical in the literal way. That statement can be arrived at.
I think there is some correction that I would bring in
Please, sir.
here.
Yes.
Yeah. Up till now, you are on your mark. It's very good. You have got most of the important points here. Only thing is that by common sense, we don't mean common sense as we understand it, right? Common sense, as used in Kant, is that the sense ability to sense things, right? Through our sense organs, something that is given by sensibility, right? So that should be faculty which everybody should have, right? So that is what we mean by common sense. And the problem in understanding the term common sense is because we use word common sense for something entirely different from what Kant is trying to imply here, right?
Right. So
Yeah, continue. Very good. Yeah.
So could you please repeat once again?
Yeah, common sense as used by Kant, and again, but it means the faculty of senses, like taste, sound, like touch, like seeing something, right? Sensory organs. In that sense, he's talking about commonality of sensory organs and sensibility. And this is something that has to be a priori assumed that somebody should have, right? So people should have ability to sense things. So that is something that should be common to people.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What about the people who are deprived of the
so they won't be able to sense those things. For example, if you say this is beautiful landscape and a person does not have eyes or vision, then that person won't be able to make a statement, this is a beautiful landscape. Does that make some sense? So common sense, it's in this sense of the word common sense.
Right, sir. I will make that correction.
And it's good that it's brought up because this can cause confusion. We may assume that this is common sense in that sense of sabke paas hona chahiye kind of thing. That is not what is being meant here. Right?
Right. Okay. So, yeah. And so that was the second condition that we talked about. And then we move on to the third condition, that is that the statement should be necessary, as we discussed previously, and not trivial, as in it should not be like a tautology, like A is A. This is a landscape and it's and that is that. That's not, it should add something, right? So it should be a necessary, a particular statement.
Right.
This is the third condition. And the fourth condition is it should have purposiveness without purpose. Now this I felt was a tricky one because I understood it, but I am not really able to articulate it, because it should have, see, where here Kant defines, what Kant defines is something that is beyond it's since we discussed for a priori statements, it should have a common ground, a transcendental ground. So he says that there should be something common in the statement, but it should not have a purpose. So that is what is being talked about. These were the four conditions that needs to be fulfilled for a reflexive statement to be true, right? And this was groundbreaking, and this has been the center of discussion, because this was the first time Kant used reasoning to define ethics. And before this, in the medieval era, and even before Kant's time, religious and political authorities decided what was ethical and what was not. And this was one sort of a characteristic of modernity, that reasoning is being used to come to ethics and all of that, come to the conclusion of ethics and all of that. Also, the idea that Kant is using rationality to understand rationality, that we discussed as well. And this is again one more example characteristic of modernity. Then we discussed the idea of a genius, and that a genius is somebody who can derive laws from their imagination. So I please correct me if I'm wrong, but Newton, I think I would, by Kant's definition, I would put Newton into the category of a genius.
Right.
Derive the laws of motion from his falling apple and everything.
Right. Right.
So I think that is all that I have to say, and yeah, thank you.
Well, that was fairly comprehensive. Very good. Very good. So, does anyone have some difficulties or questions regarding this?
Sir, could you please explain the concept of purposiveness again, according to Kant?
Okay. 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 So what I will do is I will share the screen once again so that you get the idea here. Right. Okay. Where is the screen? Screen share to the right. Okay. Yeah. Can you see this? Can you see the note Word document that I'm sharing?
Yes, sir.
Right. So this is the chart of transcendental idealism, the name of the theory which Kant is proposing, right? And what he is saying here is that transcendental analytic, right, supplies concept to our understanding, right? And transcendental aesthetic supplies categories to sensibility or our sensory organs or our ability to have senses, and imagination transforms the data that comes through senses into forms. It gives forms, and understanding supplies concepts. Concepts, according to Kant, describe purpose, right? That is what he means. For example, hammer or idea of walking. Now, all these are categories, cause, effect. All these categories, according to him, the term that he uses is purposiveness. That is, this is a transcendental faculty, which this is part of your mind, right? And mind, and this is object that you see, say for example this screen, right? So mind and object both have something that transcends them, and that is the faculty of knowing, faculty of reason, or human faculty to know that this thing in front of you is the screen, right, is not merely a product of human mind but of this faculty, right? And this faculty is purposiveness. That means to say something more, for example, and we are, remember, talking about scientific knowledge here, and what we mean by that is, suppose you want to find out what is the purpose of nitrogen on Mars. I don't know if there is nitrogen on Mars, but to find out why is there oxygen on Mars or why is there water on Moon, you have to assume that water on the Moon has some purpose. Am I making some sense? If I want to even ask the question, why is there water on the Moon? Or why is there oxygen on Earth? Or why is there why do you have 2 kidneys? Why not 1? Or why is it that you have large intestine and small intestine. In order to ask these questions, you must assume something beforehand, and that is purposiveness. That means large intestine has a purpose, small intestine has a purpose, water on moon has a purpose. This has to be assumed a priori, by which it means before you assume mind and oxygen, you have to assume that oxygen has some purpose. Am I making some sense? This is slightly abstract, and I want you to try to figure out what I'm saying here. That in order to ask question that why is there why does Saturn have rings, right? Then you have to assume that rings have some purpose. Am I making some sense? And that has to be assumed a priori. That means it is transcendental. It transcends both mind and the object. That is what he means. And the relation between mind and the object has to be assumed as that of some agreement or harmony, and that is the term he uses. And why do you need to do that? Is, say for example, you come up with a formula, sum of all angles of triangle is 180 degrees. In order to come up with this kind of knowledge, right, this kind of knowledge exists, E is equal to mc square, you have to assume that there is an agreement between your mind and the universe, or the nature. Word nature is what Kant used. So your mind and nature has a kind of agreement, and that agreement is transcendental. That means it is beyond both mind and nature. This is an abstract idea, and I'm sure you will have some difficulty in trying to understand this. And this is the way in which he resolves empiricist versus rationalist debate. Because rationalists say that knowledge that this is a screen comes from the idea of the screen, concept, screen that is in your mind. While empiricists said that this concept is formed by association through sensory data only. There is no such thing like pre-existing idea of computer screen in your mind. Your mind is tabula rasa. Through association, you have formed this idea called screen, right? And Kant is saying that in order to come up with this association, right, between various data, various inputs that our senses have given us, you have to assume that there is a faculty of knowing which says this is a screen and this is not an elephant, right? It has to be there, which is beyond the screen and your mind. It is a priori transcendental. Is that much clear? And this transcendental agreement, or a transcendental common ground between subject and object, is what is known as purposiveness. Is that clear? What is purposiveness? Any questions?
Yes, sir. I got it a
Right.
little bit. I'll read more about it.
Now, what happens that when you see a work of art, or say, for example, you listen to a song, which is the object, right? Then to say that this is a beautiful song requires that in your understanding, there is a concept called beautiful already existing, right? Now, such kind of concepts do not exist, because everybody would have found this song beautiful. But some of you would say, oh, this song is not very good. I don't like this song. Which means there is no universal category called beautiful. Which means there is no universal concept called beautiful, like the concept of screen, right? Everybody has this concept of screen, and that's why you can see screen in front of you. Am I making sense here? And because there is no concept of beautiful, but this faculty does exist, right? So purposiveness exists, but concept of beautiful does not exist, which means this is purposiveness without purpose. I will come to your question later, Pooja. First, let me clarify this for people, right? So that this is a beautiful song or beautiful landscape, you have to come up with a concept of beautiful which is universal, right? And that kind of concept does not exist. And what Kant would go on to say that what happens when you listen to a song is that your senses, your ears collect the data, right? And your imagination gives it a form, right? Your imagination is able to detect pattern and rhythm in that music or song. And then your understanding, for example, let's take an example of instrumental music, because there are no words in it for you to understand, right? How many of you have heard instrumental music, right? Say, for example, piano or flute or tabla or whatever, drums. Now in instrumental music, there are no words for you to understand, right? So what happens in such a situation is that your ears are able to detect, and ears are part of your sensibility, and your imagination detects a form in it, right? Is detected by imagination, but there is no concept of beautiful. So what happens that this goes to your emotion rather than your understanding, right? So the response that you give to instrumental music is emotional and not conceptual. Is that much clear? Yes, no, maybe. The response that you give to instrumental music is not conceptual. Is that much clear?
Yes, it is. Yes, sir.
Right. So it is, there is still this agreement between the object, that is instrumental music, and your mind, right? So purposiveness exists, but there is no concept, right? So there is no purpose in it, right? And that gives our definition of beauty that Kant gives, that it is purposiveness without purpose. By purpose, you mean concepts, right? There are no concepts of beautiful, but at the same time, there is an agreement between your mind and the object, which is transcendental. So there is purposiveness, but there is no purpose. And this is what but all this is universal. The emotional response, ability to give emotional response is universal, but it is subjective. So aesthetic faculty, according to Kant, is universal and subjective at the same time, which is paradoxical, because we usually associate subjective with things which are not universal, right? So this is what he means by subjective universal. Yes. Now, what he says that there is certain kind of free play of imagination that happens when you respond to instrumental music. When you respond to a flute or tabla, your imagination is playing. That means it is not bound by concepts of from understanding. There is no constraints of concepts. This is, so he uses words like free lawfulness of imagination. Now this is another paradox. Yeah. What do we mean by free lawfulness? Is that imagination is is not bound by this. It's not bound by concept. It is bound by this. That means it is free from concepts, but it is not free from purposiveness. This is what he means by free lawfulness of imagination. Any questions about this? Free lawfulness of imagination? Are you with me? Any
Yes.
difficulty?
Yes.
Yeah, see, in online, I have to rely on your word to understand whether it sinks in or not. And you will find out that when you're dealing with conceptual things which are abstract, you cannot afford to be distracted on other things. You have to be in the conversation. Had philosophy been easy, then everybody would have done it, right? Everybody would have been Kant. So it requires concentration from your part and an effort to try to figure out what we are discussing. And then, so what do you mean by that? Free lawfulness of imagination is that it is not bound by conceptuality, it is bound by purposiveness, right? It is similar to purposiveness without purpose. Now, because aesthetic judgment and ethical judgment, right, are reflexive and not determinative, and by that we mean that there is no concept in universal concept in ethical judgment as well as in aesthetic judgment. There is no such thing like universal good or universal bad. Something which is universally good, ऐसी कोई चीज नहीं है, or universally bad, because some good things may be in certain contexts bad and some bad things may be in some contexts good. And we give example of killing people, right? Killing people is wrong or bad, but then in certain contexts you do kill people and it is seen as sign of bravery, as in battlefield, right? Right, so that like aesthetics and ethics, the judgment does not rely on subsuming something within a kind of general concept, universal concept. So what do we need to do is we have to invent universal categories. Universal categories of beauty and goodness do not exist. You have to invent them through rationality, right? And when you do that, it is called categorical imperative in ethics, right? And Jaladi, he does not use word categorical imperative in aesthetics, right? He limits it to ethics. So in ethics, you have to come up with idea of categorical imperative, which means whether a particular rule can be made into a universal rule. That means, is smoking good? How will you decide if smoking is good? Then can you make it into a universal rule where your children will be also free to smoke, or your siblings or your parents or your grandparents or your friends? If you can make that into general universal rule, then it becomes universal, right? Am I clear? Similarly, there are 4 conditions that you have to follow in order to make aesthetic judgment, right? Like this is a beautiful landscape. So in order to come up with universal idea of beauty, you have to follow, it should have 4 conditions. That it should be disinterested, means it does not depend on my taste or my interest. Right, and this is where he makes a distinction between beautiful and agreeable. Beautiful, according to Kant, is something, a judgment or a category which is not a function of my own interest. For example, if I like classical music, then I will find classical music beautiful, right? So it is not beautiful according to Kant because it reflects my interest. Somebody may say, I prefer ghazal. Ghazal is beautiful. Then somebody says that I prefer hip hop or rap, and somebody may say I prefer Bollywood Sufi music. Now all these are your individual preferences. They are not your, they cannot be considered as beautiful just because you prefer it, right? And very often you can see that such statements that I like Sufi music, therefore it is beautiful, right, is comes from certain purpose of your own. It serves some interest and purpose. So it is not purposiveness without purpose. So such kind of claims, Kant calls it agreeable, right? Not beautiful. So you can say Sufi music is agreeable to me. Or somebody may say, I prefer abstract modern art and I don't like realistic art. Then you are making a claim about its agreeableness. You are not making a claim about its beauty, right? So in order to make a statement that something is beautiful, to make it a kind of universal, right, you have to be disinterested. Only then it will be universal, and it's fairly easy to understand. You can't say that beautiful becomes a universal category if I like it. I like a particular musician, so whatever he or she sings is beautiful. Such kind of claims cannot hold. So you have to make it disinterested. Now, what is so important about this is Kant is saying that in order to develop aesthetics, right, in order to come up with definition of beauty, right, to create a theory of beauty, you have to be objective, right? You have to transcend subjectivity in some way. You cannot say that I love this kind of novels, so these novels are beautiful. You have to go beyond your preferences and likes. And this becomes a core idea in Western criticism after Kant. I am repeating what I am saying. The idea that to be a critic or develop a theory of beauty, you have to go beyond or rise beyond your interests and preferences. Only then you can create a theory, or only then you can make critical statements, right? So the need for objectivity, need for disinterestedness becomes one of the leading ideas in subsequent criticism. Is that much clear? Why Kant is so important? Why are we spending so much time on such difficult idea here? Is because Kant for first time theorizes that in order to come up with an aesthetic theory, to come up with criticism, you have to transcend your personal likes and dislikes. You have to be objective, you have to be disinterested. That is a better word than objective. Disinterested. Clear? This becomes the leading idea. Another very important idea that Kant is giving us, which becomes a kind of leading idea henceforth in subsequent criticism right up to 20th century, is that because let's go back to this example, right? That you listen to instrumental music and it goes to your imagination, uh, uh, right? And then it appeals to emotions rather than to concepts, right? Which means that domain of artistic, what should I say, domain of art and responding to art is cannot be reduced to conceptuality, right? So aesthetic responses belong to a different domain from science. There is an irreconcilable split between science and art, right? Why? Because according to Kant, art and artistic domain is autonomous. It is separate from aesthetics and scientific knowledge, right? So human faculty of knowing and knowledge itself is trifurcated in Kant. It is divided into scientific knowledge, ethical knowledge, and aesthetic knowledge. There are three parts, which means aesthetic knowledge does not rely on scientific knowledge, and aesthetic knowledge does not rely on ethical knowledge. Now, this is a radical thing to say, because remember, if you go back to classical paradigms of beauty and art, then right from Cicero onwards and Horace onwards, we have been hearing that art is to be delightful and useful, to delight and to instruct. Remember? Does anyone remember this statement that function of art is to delight and to teach? Who remembers this?
Yes, sir, we do.
So teach is the didactic function, right? To teach. Now what Kant is doing is that he's separating delight from use, delight from scientific knowledge. So art has a kind of objective status. It is autonomous. And what do you mean by that? Suppose you visit Taj Mahal and you see, right, Taj Mahal. I don't know how many of you have seen Taj Mahal.
We have. So let's just assume we all have.
Right. Or some other place, say for example, Delwara Temple or Ellora Caves.
Or MS
right?
University.
Yeah, the Dome of I'm not very sure of that, but okay, I give you that. If you have visited such ancient grand monuments, then you don't ask what is the ethical use of that. When you listen to instrumental music, what instructions do you receive? क्या सीखते हो जिससे आप बेहतर इंसान बन सकते हो? You don't, right? So split between ethics and aesthetics is a huge intervention in thinking about art, which is extensively philosophized and theorized by Kant. And that becomes a kind of problem, and right up to Oscar Wilde, who says art for art's sake, Walter Pater and Oscar Wilde. All these people talk about art should be useless. All art is useless, right? All beautiful things are absolutely useless, is what Oscar Wilde says. And this split between ethics and aesthetics has kind of deep-seated implications for us. And that is why you can see that there is a split in knowledge. साइंस फैकल्टी अलग हो गई, कॉमर्स अलग हो गई, आर्ट्स अलग हो गया, राइट? Aesthetic knowledge cannot be reduced to conceptual or philosophical or scientific knowledge. And that created a problem for university system, right? And the problem is, how do we justify study of art if it does not have any use, or if it does not give you any scientific knowledge? How do you justify study of arts? कीट्स की पोएम पढ़ने से ना ही आप बेहतर इंसान बनने वाले हो, ना ही आपको पैसे मिलने वाले हैं, तो आप क्यों कर रहे हैं ये सब, राइट? Can you see the crisis of humanities and arts, study of arts, that Kantian split has caused? And we are till today struggling with answers, right? In order to justify study of art on disciplinary grounds so that we can get fundings. Why should government spend money on you and your study of Shakespeare? Do you know government spends huge amount of money on you? All our salaries, all the institutional fundings come from government, and your fees are heavily subsidized, right? Because you are studying in a state granted university. So it must be 10 times the fees that you pay that government bears. And that government pays that money out of taxes that it collects from your parents, from your petrol pump spendings, and so on and so forth. What is the justification for studying Milton's Paradise Lost, right? So if the idea of pure beauty that seems to be implicit in Kantian theory, right? Because he has separated agreeable from beautiful. Then, and by arguing art is autonomous, causing a split between delight and instruct, then there is a crisis in bourgeois value system. So in some way, Kant is critiquing the bourgeois values as well, which ask utilitarian questions about life. ताजमहल देखने का क्या फायदा है? हम अच्छा लगता है ना भी लगे आपको, right? और अच्छा लगना it cannot be a justification for government spending such huge amount of money on people. So this kind of, that art is autonomous becomes a major issue in subsequent criticism, right? So this reflexive beauty, like ethics and art, they have common ground that both ethics and aesthetics have to invent, or in order to make some judgments, it has to fulfill certain conditions like these. So is it clear what we mean by autonomy of art here? Any questions about this?
Sir, would you please repeat the last statement that you...
Which one?
About art and the conditions.
Yeah, so in order to make ethical judgments, right? Beauty, then you have to fulfill these 4 conditions that you said. जल्दी तूने जो condition बोली वही मैं कह रहा.
हाँ तो I mean, so
एक disinterested होनी चाहिए, right? Universal होना चाहिए, necessary, and it has to be purposiveness without purpose, something that I discussed, right?
yes.
So the last statement I made is, this is what we mean by autonomous. Art is autonomous.
Right. So, so these conditions that we discussed are there for ethical judgments as well as aesthetic judgments, right?
No, no, no. For ethical judgments, he uses term called categorical imperative.
Okay. I get it.
But for beauty, these are the conditions.
All right. See, that was a little bit of a...
Yeah. That was your confusion even when you
Yes,
were
I wasn't
speaking,
even aware
right?
of it. Yes.
And that's why I said that we limit the use of the term categorical imperative for his ethics. Though the underlying idea is the same, that there is no universal idea of good or bad. In similar way, there is no universal idea of beautiful, right? And in order to make, so you have to invent universal idea of beautiful and universal idea of good. And in order to do that, you have to follow certain conditions. So in order to invent a universal idea of good, you have to use the principle of categorical imperative. And in order to invent the idea of universal idea of beautiful, you have to follow these conditions that you said. Is that much clear?
Yes, now it is. Yes.
Right. So that leads us to the idea of autonomy of art, right? And which again leads to another distinction that he makes between free beauty and accessory beauty. By free beauty, he means beauty for the sake of beauty. It is purposiveness, right? It does not have any purpose, right? Say for example, a beautiful church or beautiful temple. Then temple must have a use that you should go and worship in it. So that is an example of accessory beauty. Or beautiful cell phone. It has a certain purpose that it should be good for whatever tasks that you do with your cell phone. So all this is accessory beauty. It is not pure beauty. It's not free beauty. Because in free beauty, there is a free play of imagination, free lawfulness of imagination. Beautiful is disinterested and agreeable is based on personal likes and dislikes, something that we discussed, right? So accessory beauty is like that. It has a particular function. For example, beautiful model of car. Now it is not enough that it is beautiful. Of course, में कार का इस्तेमाल भी होना चाहिए. It should be a car first, right? Before being a beautiful car. You get what I'm saying? It has a purpose, right? And that leads him to make a very interesting distinction between fine art versus mercenary arts. By mercenary, you mean commercial, right? Fine arts, according to Kant, is a way of presenting that is purposiveness of its own, art for art's sake, right? Without a purpose. Mercenary art make possible object actual, agreeable. Let me give you an example. The apple that you see in still life painting. I don't know how many of you have seen still life paintings. Have you seen paintings of grapes and apples? How many of you?
Yes, we have.
Now you cannot eat those grapes and apples, can you?
No.
Which means it does not fulfill the purpose of grapes and apple. The only purpose that still life painting of apple and grapes it fulfills is to appear like apple and grapes, not fulfill the purpose of apples and grapes, right? So purposive art or mercenary art emphasizes purpose, right? It should have its use value, utilitarian value. So what Kant is critiquing is the pervasive utilitarianism in the bourgeois society of his times, right? The industrialized bourgeoisie, the middle class, which is materialistic and asks only one question, इससे मुझे क्या फायदा हो? अगर आपके फायदे के लिए हो रहा है तो वो आर्ट ही नहीं है, right? So he's attacking the bourgeois values, and that's why romantics were interested in Kant, because it's a critique of bourgeois modernity, a bourgeois value system.
Sir,
Yeah.
so mercenary art possesses possesses accessory beauty. Is it right to say that?
हाँ हाँ बिल्कुल बिल्कुल करेक्ट करेक्ट.
Right.
और वो पैसे के लिए होता है. मर्सिनरी कौन होता है जो पैसे के लिए करता है सब.
हाँ जी, हाँ जी.
And that's why it's an attack on. Yes, Smith, very good. In some way, he's aristocratic. Very good observation, Smith. Very good. He's attacking bourgeois values from the point of view of aristocracy. Something similar to Sir Philip Sidney's elevation of art to highest form of knowledge, right? Sir Philip Sidney में जैसा होता है वैसे. Very good, very good.
But sir, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, is it that Kant is favoring the aristocratic views, or is it that because see, now I'm not placing things in a non-historical context, but it is at first the person is going to fulfill their basic needs, right? So the only people who are actually able to afford this these ideas of beauty, as Kant puts it, were the aristocratic ones. So
In a way, yes.
yes, right. So it went both ways, right? I mean, it's not really that Kant is favoring the aristocratic ideas, but you know, they had the means to enjoy beauty for beauty's sake, free beauty.
Yeah. So what's the question?
So how is that statement right? You know, to make that
Yes,
Kant
your
is
understanding is right. But then you know what you may also look at, say for example, tribal music, right, which not meant for money or whatever. But in a way, you are right that there is a tendency to kind of going back to aristocratic view of arts. Yeah, you are right, because they have that much money. But then bourgeoisie also had money, but they did not enjoy art, right? They would ask for purpose. क्या फायदा ये सब आर्ट्स फार्ट्स पढ़ के.
is it right to say in the contemporary terms the middle class, even right now, like you know, there is this idea notion of usefulness that is still prevalent today in the 21st century in our day-to-day lives. So is it right to say that they supported those bourgeois values are still alive today?
Because the bourgeois is still alive today.
Yeah, so that's the same bourgeois we're talking about, right?
Bourgeois is the French term by which we mean the middle class, upper middle class, capitalist class, right? As different from the feudal classes. Feudal was hereditary based hierarchy, right? As against that, you have a class which got social mobility through earning, through capitalism, basically. पैसे कमाकर वो ऊपर गए society में. You get what I'm saying here?
I do.
Yeah, so he's pointing out this the whole bourgeois value system, which looks at everything from utilitarian, pragmatic perspective, right? Is very cannot understand what art is unless you have to transcend these values, right? And in doing that, he seems to be going towards aristocratic value system. And interestingly, Kant himself belongs to the bourgeoisie, right? And this is going to be a contradiction that you will find throughout English criticism and European thought. And Marxists would point out that the aristocratic class is on decline and the bourgeoisie is on rise. So bourgeoisie would appropriate ideas of aristocracy to establish themselves as superior to working class. Smith, this is for you, right? And these are the values of art for art's sake, which bourgeois appropriated to establish their superiority over working class. That is what Marxists would point out. Like Terry Eagleton.
Could you please?
Yeah. Very good. Now I think you have another class coming up at 1. Right? Okay. Should we discuss the last point for today or should we leave it for tomorrow? What's your suggestion?
So we can do it tomorrow.
Hmm.
So I think everybody is going to agree to that.
Okay.
Yes, it's tomorrow.
Right. And we'll take this question which Pooja has asked about genius also tomorrow. So Pooja, can you repeat the question tomorrow? Pooja Dolak, yeah. Okay. So now again, all these classes are available on Teams. So please download them and listen to them in case you have not understood or you were doing something else more interesting while classes were on. Because this may not be as interesting, but this is extremely important for exams. एग्जाम में आने वाला है और इस बार एग्जाम शायद ऑफलाइन भी हो सके, वी डोंट नो. ऐसे टाइप आपको आंसर्स लिखना आ सकता है, आएगा ही ऐसा नहीं बोल रहा हूं मैं, आ सकता है. Right? So please take this seriously. Okay then. So we are stopping for today and we meet tomorrow, right? And we'll continue some 1 or 2 important points in Kant. And if you have any, tomorrow is going to be the last day for Kant. So please read everything that is given in Habib. Listen to all class lectures and bring all the difficulties tomorrow because 2 or 3 important points may get over in 15-20 minutes. Rest of the class is for the doubts and difficulties in Kant before we go on toward Hegel, right? So please bring all the doubts tomorrow. So we meet tomorrow. Have a good day and take care.